voters in Tanzania will head to the polls in about 2 weeks to elect their president. Incumbent John Magufuli faces determined opposition. Now, elected to a first term back in 2015, he has been applauded by some for advancing a series of major developmental projects. But others have denounced him for his arguably autocratic rule. Now, since mid-June, the government has arrested at least 17 opposition party members, and critics of the state suspended a rights group and even cancelled the license of another. Major rights groups have also been blocked from observing the upcoming elections, according to some reports coming in. But to discuss this a little bit further ahead of the elections set to take place on the 28th of October, we are joined by Northwest University lecturer, Professor Barry Hanyane. A very good morning to you, Professor Barry. Thanks for joining us as always here on Weekend Dawn. I mean, as I mentioned in my introduction, there are some mixed reactions coming through about incumbent President John Magufuli and perhaps his legacy that he's had over the past 5 years. Let's hone in on what that legacy has looked like, perhaps before we delve into some of the other issues related to the economy and opposition at large.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Good morning to you, Liezle. It's good to be here once again. Look, he came in as a populist candidate who wanted to rewrite Tanzania's political legacy book, if you want to call it that way, in the backdrop of former presidents such as Kikwete, Mkapa, Hassan, and his main political ticket was to clean government out of corruption and make sure that Tanzania occupies its position in the continent as a leader of liberation in the continent and a supporter of democratic practices in the continent, obviously. And somewhere in between that, I think the plot was lost. The liberties and freedoms that were supposed to be given to your opposition parties, to civil society, allowing dissent in that country, sort of like took a back step, and repressive laws were almost established, which then could not allow free campaigning, free movement of opposition parties, of course, voicing out dissent in public. But at the same time, some kind of progress, admittedly, was noted. So you have this dialectic, if you want, situation where on the one hand, there is progress in terms of stabilizing the state, but on the other hand, freedoms and liberties of ordinary folks is taken away from them.
Professor, then looking at those human rights abuses that you've alluded to, and even just some of the repressive autocratic rulings, that has come in during his tenure, and also just looking at some of the central issues that voters will be perhaps, will focus on come the 28th of October. I mean, how are these issues of human rights abuses and autocratic rulings going to impact and sway voters going in? I mean, just before we get to the opposition forming coalitions, perhaps to get some of the other parts of the country, I mean, is Tanzania ready for free and fair election?
Not really, Liezle, but again, it depends from which perspective you look at this question. Firstly, let's appreciate the fact that Tanzania is sort of like two spaces of electoral contestations. It's your mainland, and then, of course, it's Zanzibar. Zanzibar politics there still continue demanding independence. People like Sharif Hamad trying to push that perspective forward, saying to Zanzibaris, this is the time for their independence. No other time will come if they don't claim it now. But come to mainland. The issue there, once again, I suspect, it's more of saying Magufuli, the current president, the current incumbent, must be judged on the amount of changes that have been brought. Secondly, the opposition in the mainland is somewhat divided. I don't see any chance of coalition. I think they have given Magufuli the second term on a platter. He will walk through, of course, aided by the less conducive election climate and atmosphere in that country.
Well, Prof, then speaking about the opposition parties at play and even the dynamics between the coalition, as we alluded to as well. I mean, looking at the timing of it as well on the back of COVID-19 and also some of the macroeconomic factors that will influence markets and investor confidence going into this elections, and perhaps what it's also going to do for the region at large. What is being unearthed as we speak, as people are taking these considerations into account come the 28th of October?
Yeah. Well, this is where the former Foreign Minister, Mr. Bernard Membe, has created his own platform of politicking and electioneering. He sees Tanzania playing an important role in the politics of East Africa, and of course the economic integration of that economic region in the continent, and of course influencing to a certain extent your global economy and politics. But that's just about it, really. Tanzania is still somewhat inward-looking when we assess its politics, and this is where John Magufuli comes in. Notwithstanding the campaign by Tendo Lucy, who pushes the issue of human rights more than anything else. So you have a fraction of electioneering and campaigning, but things stand. I think Magufuli has a chance to unseat them. And of course, as I said earlier on, conditions and the atmosphere is conducive for him to get his second term. And the nice part is that he has already taken a position that he is not interested in taking a third term, something that the Tanzanian voters would want to take to heart.
And Prof, just looking at some of the international reactions coming through from Amnesty International, amongst other organizations, as they head into the elections come the 28th of October, obviously citing issues of media suppression, silencing, amongst other atrocities. I mean, what is the impact of those reactions going to have come the 28th of October?
Look, I think this election is a foregone conclusion, despite those restrictions, despite the repressive nature of government's attitudes toward guaranteeing and promoting social liberties. I don't see this bringing the same effect as was the case with the Arab Spring, where the youth using technology to influence public opinion would then sway voter sentiment. I don't see this happening now. It's too late. The 28th is around the corner. Rightly so, as I said earlier, conditions are fertile for the Magufuli campaign to take it back to office and perhaps deal with this issue in his second term, which would be too late in any case to salvage something for the opposition party come the 28th of October.
All right, Professor Barry Hanyane, we're going to leave that conversation there. Again, lecturer at the Northwest University, Professor Barry Hanyane, just chatting to us about the upcoming elections in Tanzania, which is set to take place on the 28th of October.